The city of Paris is seen in all its beauty and splendor. Luke, a young man who just traveled to Paris, is walking through the streets, carrying his hand luggage. He seems lost and doesn't know how to navigate his way to his destination. Just by a corner, the beautiful and young Jamila is standing by, wearing an earpiece. She seems to be listening to music even as Luke approaches her. As Luke meets her, she takes off the earpiece to properly have a conversation with him. Luke asks Jamila the route he'd need to take to get to Croix de Chavaux. Jamila, with a mild smile on her face, is interested in helping him. She takes him to a corner where they find an area map, and she explains the routes for him. When she's done, there's an awkward silence between them. Jamila seems to have lost composure. She scratches her head like a lady who's love-struck, and she sneakily looks at Luke. They enter a metro bus together, since they are moving in the same direction. On the bus, Luke stands close to Jamila. There's a mutual but hidden attraction between them. Both Jamila and Luke stare at each other, but avoid eye contact. Such lovebirds. The man in Luke reveals himself, and he strikes up a conversation. He tells Jamila that he isn't from Paris, but it isn't his first time in Paris either. They keep stealing glances for a while, till they get to the bus stop, where they alight. Jamila quickly starts walking away in the opposite direction, without looking back. Luke catches up with her and asks her if they could see later that day. She tells him she'd be working, but would close by 5 p.m. Luke fancies the idea of meeting her after work. The feeling is mutual for Jamila, as she pens down her work address for him. Before they go their separate ways, she tells him the route to get to her, and hopes he doesn't get lost. It's 5 p.m., and Luke is waiting on the other side of the road just opposite Jamila's workplace. After a short while of him waiting, Jamila steps out with a friend, Jasmine. Jamila sees Luke and stylishly shows him Jasmine, who covertly looks at him. The two ladies share a hug, and while Jasmine goes her own way, Jamila goes over to Luke. Luke reckons he had a good day, as he met with one of his dad's friends. They want to hang out but don't know how to go about it, and Jamila suggests they take a walk first. While on their walk, she reveals how she ran away from home, and also reveals her plans to better herself. When Jamila asks, Luke reveals he does joinery. He also reveals he works with his dad, who is also a joiner. He reveals his plan of wanting to be a cabinet maker instead, and that's the reason he's in Paris, to take the Boule School's exam. Luke is staying at his dad's cousin's place. He knows he wouldn't have the luxury of any private moment with Jamila, so they opt to sit at a restaurant. Without getting drinks or eating a snack, they sit there and admire themselves. Jamila doesn't hide her deep admiration for the stranger. She remarks how gentle she thinks Luke is, and Luke smiles in return. Luke walks Jamila to her apartment. He gives an interesting story about one of his teachers. At her apartment's door, the two instant lovers hug and then say their goodbyes. It's the next day, and Luke goes for his exam. The exam seems to be an unconventional one, as he and two other candidates enter the workshop. The examiner asks a few questions, and as they answer, he's not too impressed, except with Luke, who attempts almost all questions. The examiner takes a few notes about all the candidates and tells them they can go as he concludes his round of questions. Luke is out of the workshop and finds his way to see Jamila, who's out on her break time with Jasmine. Jamila, who's having a chat with Jasmine, is excited to see her beloved Luke. She immediately wants to know how the exams went, and he indulges her. Jasmine reminds Jamila that break time is over, but she urges Jasmine to report that she's sick so she wouldn't have to go back to work. She wants to spend more time with Luke, hence the lie. Besides, what's the use of a sick person at work? No use at all. Immediately after Jasmine leaves, they plunge into each other's arms and stay there like they are stuck. After a while, they are at the front of the building, and their arm-locking hug begins again. After planting a kiss on her forehead, Luke wants them to go to Jamila's apartment, but she confirms that it won't be possible. While they take a few steps away from their initial spot, Luke reveals that he'll be leaving soon. Jamila is aware of that, but now feels a certain kind of way. They stop, and Jamila asks for another round of hugs. While she rests her head on Luke's chest in their standing position, Luke reiterates his desire to spend some alone time with her, and this interests Jamila. She leads Luke to the lobby leading to her apartment. As much as she fancies alone time with Luke, she knows it isn't a possibility. Luke can't get his hands off her as he pins her to the wall, but he can't really do much. There's silent communication, and Luke takes his leave while Jamila walks into her apartment. Luke resolves to do all it takes to have that alone time with Jamila. He invites her to where he lives and quietly takes her to his room to avoid his cousin seeing her. They enter the room, and after taking off her jacket, Jamila dives into bed and covers it with a duvet. It feels like an invitation for Luke, who looks for a way to lock the door and then join her on the bed. They are good at staring, so they stare at each other for a while before Luke starts kissing her. Luke's hand becomes a wandering tool as he moves it all over Jamila's body. Jamila stops Luke's hand from wandering into her trousers, as she doesn't want to take it that far just yet. This changes Luke's mood. He presses to know why Jamila has stopped him, but she doesn't say much. She thinks they can do other things without Luke's wandering hand getting into her trousers. Luke doesn't care about the other stuff Jamila thinks they can do. He's infuriated and leaves the bed, telling Jamila he wants to walk her home. The next day, Luke's mission in Paris has now come to an end, and he leaves Paris that day. He takes his luggage and waits for Jamila, who comes out with Jasmine. Jasmine excuses them. She thinks Luke's travel is unplanned, but Luke only came for an exam. She wants them to go somewhere more private to continue talking. They move deep into the street and under a tree. There, they begin staring at themselves, wishing they had all the time in the world. The feelings they have for themselves manifested through their smiles and unsaid words. Hugs and kisses are now inevitable as they rush into each other's arms in no time. After a brief moment of affection, they continue walking. Luke promises that he'll always remember her and begins a solo walk as Jamila goes back to work. Luke is back home helping his dad in the workshop as they work on carving a coffin. Both of them are hopeful that Luke's exams will turn out positive. Luke's father leaves him a cryptic message and infers that he might be the last person to make coffins. Luke has a job at Sabrina's house. While at it, Genevie, his high school girlfriend, is seen alighting from a car. Luke recognizes her and quickly beckons to her. They greet each other, and Luke tells her his mission in Sabrina's house. Genevieve tells him she tends to Sabrina's kids. She also explains the situation to Sabrina, who is excited on their behalf. She urges them to kiss. A French kiss, though. Genevieve is now in the bathtub filled with water, as Luke sits by her. As they chat, Luke plays with the water and also plays with Genevieve's body. He runs his hands over her and touches sensitive parts of her body so she's aroused. They begin kissing, and this leads to more intimacy, as Luke takes off his shirt. After a short while, as it seems they've just had a good time, Genevieve steps out from the bathtub while Luke hands her a towel. She confesses how much she wanted to tear into Luke the moment she saw him. She misses him so much, and those talks of Luke being a joiner weren't interesting to her. She just wanted to taste Luke again. She goes on to talk about how she couldn't stop thinking of him when he left. Luke's friends didn't help matters, as they kept making fun of her at that time. Luke gives his own account. He reveals how his dad's relocation caused him to cry, as he missed Genevieve every day. He reveals that every time he thought about her, he cried. Genevieve is happy to hear that Luke really thought of her after their circumstantial breakup. They say all these while they both dress up. Luke goes to the mailbox outside and picks up mail for him. It's from Jamila. She misses Luke and tells him of how she's been checking out Luke's location on the internet. Luke and Genevieve rekindle their love. She's seen holding hands with Luke in the presence of Luke's father, who's telling them a story of how his dad passed away. His father passed away when he was 5 years old, but no one told him. He kept asking where his father was till he was 15. Only then did his mother tell him, and he ran away. He later found out from an old woman that his father drowned himself because he was owed too much debt. Genevieve and Luke console him. On a certain day, while Luke's dad sits and is relaxing, Luke walks up to him and asks him why he stayed as a joiner when he could have ventured into furniture making. He replies that being a joiner never goes out of fashion. Luke argues that furniture making never fades too, as one just needs to evolve with time. Luke's dad still argues it. Luke's dad and Genevieve are in the worship as Luke admires their place. She walks up to Luke's dad and asks him if he'd want Luke to marry her. He responds positively, but reckons that it's Luke's decision. Genevieve has a hunch that Luke has someone else in Paris, but Luke's dad dissuades her. He prides himself on the fact that Luke tells him everything, so he'd know if Luke actually does have someone else. Jamila picks up her phone and dials Luke's number. Luke picks up and she's excited to hear his voice. She can't wait to see Luke again. She talks about how excited she is that she'll finally see Luke the next Friday. Luke's plans to see her are being altered, but he'll try to make it. As they talk, Genevieve approaches Luke, and he hurriedly ends the discussion so as not to tip Genevieve off. While Genevieve leads him out of the workshop, she asks if Luke is talking to another woman, but Luke lies like a smooth criminal. It's evening and Genevieve goes looking for Luke. She wonders why Luke has decided not to come with her to the comedy show as he promised earlier. She finds Luke, and he says the jokes they make over there are repeated and it bores him too much. He urges Genevieve to go, but Genevieve loves him so much not to go without him. She'd rather stay with Luke and count the stars. They profess how much they can't do without each other and kiss. Jamila travels all the way to Luke's town. She rents a room for herself and Luke, who's expected to come in that evening. She wears a silver-colored dress that contours her body, feeling herself already, as she can't wait to dive into the arms of her beloved Luke. Time passes, and Luke is nowhere to be found. She picks up a jacket and then proceeds to the front desk. At the front desk, she asks for a cigarette, and the front desk officer hands her one. He acknowledges Jamila's plight and encourages her that Luke might come the next day, or never even show up. He says he has seen people like her wait for almost an eternity. Jamila hears this and is frustrated. She whimpers like a baby and excuses herself to go cry. After thanking him for the cigarette, she storms into her room crying and wipes off her lipstick. The next morning, the front desk officer benevolently drops her off at the train station. Her trip was futile, as her man didn't show up. While waiting for the train at the station, she places her bag on the chair and rests her head on it. This is a mess. Luke is seen lost in thoughts, probably feeling bad for standing Jamila up. He concurs with his thought that he has been a coward and hasn't treated this matter properly. Luke steps out to check the mailbox and picks up a letter from Paris. It's from the Boule school. Luke has passed his exams and has been admitted. He runs to tell his dad, who's excited for him. So excited that he breaks down in tears. He thinks this is a big opportunity for Luke and admonishes him not to misuse it. Luke promises that he'll make good use of it and make his dad proud. Luke shares the good news with Genevie, who is excited as she hugs and kisses him. He tells her he'll be leaving by September, so she wants to know what will happen to them after he leaves. Luke assures her that he'll get a job and makes arrangements for her to join him immediately after he gets there. But Genevie is still scared. She thinks Luke will fall out of love with her once they stop seeing each other. Luke gives her his assurance. Genevie doesn't know exactly how to feel about Luke leaving. As Luke tries to talk to her outside, she asks that he leave her alone. She's clearly vexed her man may not be her man for much longer. Luke is seen folding his clothes in a luggage when his dad walks in. He advises Luke to remain focused as he moves to Paris. He wants him to avoid temptations at all costs and be mindful of women. Luke assures him that he'll do just that and knows how to handle himself. Luke and Genevie are having dinner. There's the realization that they're going to be apart, but for a good cause. They agree to meet every other weekend, and this calms Genevie. She wonders how they'll achieve that though. But Luke tells her to believe in him. She wholeheartedly agrees, believing in her beloved Luke. While Luke walks her home, she requests that he spend the night with her. Luke already has plans to spend the night at his place with his dad. She wants it badly though. They get to a corner, and Luke tells her to go on, while he goes back to his dad. But Genevie has a cat to let out of the bag. While their proximity is close, as if they'd kiss any moment, Genevie reveals that she'll be having Luke's baby soon. He's shocked and asks if she's sure, and she confirms it. As the conversation goes on, the gap between them widens. Luke thinks that Genevie is trying to trap him and alter the positive turn his life is about to take. Genevie argues that she hasn't done anything wrong and she didn't put the baby there either. Luke thinks she's reckless because he won't be able to cater to the baby's needs. His move to Paris doesn't avail him of such luxury. She doesn't care if Luke is ready or not. She promises Luke that she'll have the baby and also promises to tell the baby how Luke has reacted to its conception. Luke resumes at Boule and is working with fellow students in the workshop. It's lunchtime, and his new friend, Victor, wants to know where he has lunch, but Luke reveals he doesn't have lunch. It sounds strange to Victor, who minds his business though. Victor and the other guys go ahead to have lunch, while Luke finds a place to sit. He munches on a chocolate bar and gets his mind busy. Genevie is with Luke's dad. They talk about the root of some of Luke's flaws. Genevie thinks Luke might be doing too much, so he doesn't disappoint his dad. Luke's dad thinks that Luke's closeness to him might just be the issue. He knows Genevie hasn't come to discuss all that, and it's just small talk. Luke's dad is disappointed that Luke hasn't told him of the pregnancy. He wants to know Genevieve's plans, and she reveals to him that she'll keep the baby. Luke's dad looks quite disorientated as he doesn't know how to handle such a matter. He admits it's hard for him as he's never experienced such a situation. He, however, promises to go see Luke in Paris. Genevie becomes emotional and bursts into tears, even as Luke's dad consoles her. She complains that since their abrupt parting that night, Luke hasn't called to check up on her. Back in Paris, Luke sneaks from his dorm into the Boule workshop. He begins admiring the tools at the workshop. He goes from one to another, touching and feeling them. He also admires the designs made there. Victor and Jean meet up with Luke. Victor discusses his encounter with a sex and expresses utmost joy in being intimate with her. Luke is back in his dorm and opens the letter his father has sent. His father wants to see him and have a meeting with him. After reading the letter, it becomes obvious to him why his dad wants to meet. It seems he already has a resolve to either ignore or delay the meeting. Luke is beginning to give up on love. He now begins to think that love may not even exist. Luke is walking on the street just behind a lady. Immediately she enters a mart. The lady notices Luke and threatens to call the police on Luke if he keeps following her. Luke argues that he wasn't following her, and she walks away. At the cafeteria, Luke is relaxing when Jean comes in. Luke tells her there's a lady inside who's pretty, and Jean decides to go talk to the lady. Jean meets her and introduces himself. The lady introduces herself as Alice, and Jean asks that they go out for dinner the next day. Jean's charm has worked on Alice as she agrees to go out with him. They set a date and time for the meeting. Jean requests that Alice come with a friend to keep Luke company. She promises to come with a colleague. As Jean goes back to Luke, he tells him of the encounter. Luke is surprised that Jean could pull it off and gives him a winner's handshake. Luke gestures that Jean has done well. The evening arrives and Jean takes Luke to the meeting point. Alice exits the building with Betsy, just as she has promised. They hug and introduce themselves. They go to a dance club where Luke and Betsy have the time of their lives as they dance so intensely and intimately. The dance begins to create a connection between them. At the end of their fun, Jean, Alice, and Betsy step out while they wait for Luke. They are accosted by two people who show acts of. They try to hurt Jean and Alice, but the pair aren't moved. Before it escalates, Luke comes and pushes the racists away. They're angry that Luke is aligning with Jean and Alice, who are not light-skinned. The two newly formed relationships are flourishing. Alice and Jean's relationship is going smoothly, while Luke and Betsy's relationship has reached high heights. As Luke continues schooling, his father's savings start to dwindle. He finds a job in a restaurant where he works only on weekends. At the restaurant, Luke is sitting with his dad. Luke's dad says he couldn't write the message he seeks to convey to Luke, deciding to meet him in person. Genevieve lost the baby, and she lost it on purpose. Luke doesn't know how to feel. He needs advice on what to do, but his dad tells him he's old enough to handle his situation. The father wants to know if he's found someone, and Luke concurs. Betsy enters and Luke makes the introductions. She has other things to do, so she excuses herself, while Luke and his dad go round up their discussions. Luke's dad has passed a clear message to him. He takes his leave after they share a hug. Luke and Betsy are now lying on a bed, cuddled up. They tell stories and tales, and while on it, there's a knock on the door. It's Luke's dad. He has missed a train and wishes to spend the night in Luke's room, but Luke doesn't care. He doesn't want his fun with Betsy to be cut short. Betsy tries to say something when Luke shuts her up. Luke's dad is fed up and storms out. Betsy teases Luke's resolve to ignore his father for moments with her. Things people do for love, though. Luke is seen waiting for Betsy when she steps out with a friend, Paco. She pleads with Luke to let Paco stay with them for a while, as he's having issues with his accommodation. Luke doesn't argue, agreeing right away. In the room, Luke and Betsy are in bed with a duvet to provide modesty. Betsy wants to have sexual intercourse with him at that very moment. Paco's eyes are wide open with the sounds from Luke, and Betsy seeming to stress him out. Luke has concerns about Paco and Betsy spending time alone while he's in school. Luke's intuition hasn't lied to him. While they lie in bed, Luke wants to know the kind of relationship Betsy has had with Paco. She tells Luke that she and Paco had been intimate, but it was nothing serious. She assures Luke that whatever she had with Paco cannot be compared with what they share now. Luke is comforted by these words. The trio, Luke, Betsy, and Paco, are in the kitchen when Betsy informs them that they have run out of gas. Luke and Paco go out to buy some, but can't find someone to attend to them. Paco breaks the place open against Luke's wish, and replaces their empty gas cylinder with one already filled. Luke's dad comes to Paris for an operation and meets Luke. He now knows that Paco and Betsy stay there with him, and he isn't impressed. Luke tells him himself and Betsy make love, while Paco is in the room. The father has his reservations about that, and reckons that he'd have done things differently. Luke and Betsy's relationship becomes a bit tumultuous, and they devise means to have their personal time. This time, Luke comes and finds a tie attached to the doorknob, a new rule that informs Luke that Betsy wants to have her personal time. He turns back and heads to a restaurant to sit. While he's idle, he thinks of Jamila and how much his actions would have hurt her. He fancies the idea of meeting her again and probably rekindling old feelings. He heads out to Jamila's apartment and finds that she's pregnant. He realizes he shouldn't be there, and he takes his leave. Luke goes back home to bad news. The operation wasn't a successful one, and his dad passed on. Luke doesn't know how to take the news. He bursts into tears, and in anger, he immediately throws Paco out of the house. Betsy consoles him, but Luke still doesn't know how to process the thought of losing his dad.